Hey everybody, this is Stephen Wilson with Social Grain. I'm here today with my guest Bleu Adams, and I'm really excited about this conversation. Bleu is the founder of a Utah-based restaurant called the House of Frybread or House of Frybread. Frybread being one of the breads that's part of the Indigenous Native American culture. So super interesting. But the House of Frybread is much more than just a restaurant, which we'll kind of get into throughout this conversation, I think. Also, Bleu does a lot more than just the owner and operator of House of Frybread. So she's got multiple restaurants, as well as her ongoing efforts against the challenges that we face in this country and the world in general. So I know she's super busy. On top of all that, she is involved with the very prestigious James Beard Foundation, which supports Black and Indigenous communities. So needless to say, I'm super excited about the having gotten this time with Bleu. I know that she's got a super busy schedule, so I think this will be a great conversation. But anyway, with that, welcome, Bleu. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
All right, so let me get into it. If we can start with your restaurant, House of Frybread, can you kind of talk to me about that and kind of what is your vision and kind of some of the background behind that restaurant?
Absolutely. So House of Frybread is my third concept. I started Black Sheep Cafe in 2012, sold that in 2018, started Blue Poblano, which was a taco shop, and partnered and sold that a couple of years ago. And when I started House of Frybread, I wanted to hopefully reach more of the Indigenous community because my last two concepts, we didn't have a big Indigenous following. So I wanted to make it very familiar, very accessible, and I modeled it after the roadside food stands you can see all across Indigenous communities.
Okay, so those roadside food stands is what types of food would you find at those stands?
So we do a lot of street comfort food.
Okay.
And one of the reasons I wanted to start House of Frybread again was we have a lot of health disparity in our community, and that's because we are a food desert.
Right.
The Navajo Nation is the size of West Virginia, but we only have 13 grocery stores. So much of the food is prepackaged, processed. But when you're working with communities that have had a history of eating processed and prepackaged foods, you kind of have to slowly introduce healthier options and expand the palate for them to really want to eat more nutritious food. So I wanted to take the opportunity to provide what you see at the food stands, but make a healthier version of it. Okay. So we cook all from scratch. We're very particular about where we source our inventory, our products, all the way down to using compostable to-go ware, because again, on my community, we don't have landfills operating there. We have to go to the border towns. So the border towns, in a sense, make money even off our garbage, if it even makes it. So sometimes you'll see a lot of litter around and a lot of styrofoam. So I wanted to show that we could also have a sustainable model even with our to-go dishes, dishware, and I shoot for compostable because even in the city, it's not a very high rate of what gets recycled. A lot of it still ends up at the landfill. So I wanted to provide something that would break down.
Right. That makes sense. Okay. So that concept you mentioned towards the beginning is the food desert. A lot of people, I feel, may not, in certain communities, right, may not understand completely like the impact of that. Like food deserts are a big issue right now. Like that's a big problem. So I think what you're doing with that House of Frybread and trying to, like you said, introduce more not only healthy options, but the sustainability aspect of it. That goes deeper than just the restaurant, right? So that's definitely good. And to kind of keep going along those same lines, I feel like, or what I've seen in some of my research is, uh, one of the core concepts or values, I guess, with House of Frybread seems to be providing a safe space for Indigenous people, which I think you kind of mentioned, right? Is the restaurant for the Indigenous folks to come and do that. Can you kind of elaborate on that, the safe space, and kind of some of the other things that you guys do outside of just food, within the restaurant, or just with some of your efforts that you do?
So I wanted to create a space that reflected Native culture in a modern way.
Okay.
A lot of times you see us and our histories and our traditions presented through a traditional lens. So I wanted to bring some modernity into how I designed the space. And I was lucky to be able to work with a local artist and an artist from Omaha, Stephen Paul Judd. They allowed me to use their design to stencil on the wall, and another local artist that created a mural that represented the Wasatch Range and also represented the Indigenous people, the Paiute, Ute, Goshute, Shoshone, and the Dene.
Okay.
So we just wanted to create a representation for them. And then we're very aware of how we provide that space for Indigenous people. We even have a sign that says, their mockery or appropriation of any culture is not acceptable here.
Right.
So when you come in, we ask that you conduct yourself in a manner that's, makes it feel great for all of us. And we also wanted, because in this, where I'm at, Utah County, there isn't a cultural center for us. So I wanted to kind of create that for the community. So we open Tuesday through Saturday. We're closed Sunday and Monday. And I offer those days free to the community if they want to say they want to do a workshop or a book club or, even a game night. We've had movie screenings. We've had educational workshops. And it's open to everybody. We're not particular about, being specific to anyone. It's literally open to everybody.
Okay. What kind of challenges did you face when you first introduced this concept? Because I'm assuming that it wasn't, super easy because this is, like you said, I mean, on both sides of it, right? It's like you're trying to modernize the traditional aspect of it, but also like you're introducing the Indigenous culture to the city, which I'm sure a lot of people in Utah, they may or may not, understand or have an appreciation for, the Native American cultures. What kind of challenges did you face during that ramp up?
Well, so far, everybody's been very supportive and asking great questions, and just for me, really, it's creating that dialogue.
Yes.
One of our murals, it says "Still Here," and that's really what we're trying to achieve. We're just trying to create advocacy for Indigenous people, that we're still here, we're thriving, we have still have space to hold in society, etc. We do have to do a lot of education. The way that we're set up, we're open from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. and we close until 5, where we open for dinner service. And the reason I did that, the restaurant industry has, it can be rough. We have a culture of high stress, a lot of us struggle with our mental health. We're many times overworked, and especially during COVID and now after COVID, the employees that do stick around have longer hours. They're doubling up shifts. So I wanted to avoid that on the outset. None of my employees work more than 6 hours. I make sure that they're paid well. They all make over $15 an hour. And then just, being aware and having a mental health check-in when they come in, before service, and making sure everybody's good, and, making sure the customer understands that this is a really tough job.
Yeah.
And that, I'm going to match your energy if you come at my employees, honestly.
Yes,
So
right.
all of that is just that creation of a better space. We want to make beautiful, nutritious food for you and offer great service, but that relationship is reciprocal. We want that same respect from our customers. So there's a lot of education going on, and I talk about it a lot. And one of the other aspects of House of Frybread is sometimes we run out of things. So we want to normalize that, because our goal is to create little to zero waste.
Oh,
Especially understanding that where we come from, where we don't have the opportunity to access a lot of the food we use there, we don't want to, we just, it'd be unconscionable for me to have to throw stuff away in bulk. And unfortunately, if you have an establishment that always has every menu that's on the item at all times, their waste is going to be pretty large. So people have been open to it, though, as long as I'm explaining and it's in our story and it's in our brand, then they're all for it.
that I don't think I've heard that too often, right? Is that you want to run lean enough to a point where you're normalizing running out of things, right? Because you don't want to waste, right? Because like you said, if you always have everything available, then there's a 100% chance that you're wasting things at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And that unfortunately it's not sustainable. It will cut into the profits, but I think the long-term benefits are what we should be talking about, because the practices we are doing now, they are not sustainable.
Right.
So another aspect is to try to create a business model that is quote unquote successful and can run on this model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's a balancing act, right? You gotta try to keep the lights on, but at the same time, keep the environment going, right? So
Absolutely.
I'm sure that's challenging. So if we can, and we'll get, I think we'll get back to House of Frybread a little bit, or Frybread in general, but if we can shift gears a little bit in your journey, and I wanna hear about some of your family's story and how your culture or your family's culture has really shaped your love or passion for cooking and cuisine, and ultimately fry bread, right? And supporting and helping your communities. Can you talk to me about some of that, some of your family story?
Sure. So my fry bread recipe right now belongs to my mom. It's how she's been cooking it for my whole life. And what's funny is, any baker is going to tell you, it really takes, you have to love doing it. You have to love making bread, because it's very difficult to build the skills where every piece of fry bread is coming out consistently hundreds of times a day. And, being respectful of how you treat the dough. It doesn't want to be, over watered. It doesn't want to be under kneaded. It doesn't want this. It wants to rest, like all of these things. And it took me, I'd say about 20 years before I really nailed the technique that my mom used. Yeah.
Wow.
It just never clicked. And then one day it clicked, and now I can do it in my sleep, which is, I'm really grateful for. But so fry bread's just always been a part of my life, and it can take on a negative connotation, but we've taken that into consideration, because it's often the first thing people want to blame for the rise of diabetes in our community. but they don't understand that that is probably more attributed to all the fast food that's in our community. So I say that because we source all of our flour from Cortez, New Mexico. It's called Bluebird flour. They've been growing, well, they source from local farms in the area, the same farms they've been sourcing for the last 150 years. They don't add additives or preservatives. They're bleaching with a plant-based bleaching product using a sifting method.
Mm-hmm.
So we already know that they're doing their best to provide a quality flour that isn't filled with chemicals and preservatives. So we change our oil out up to 6 times a day.
Oh, wow.
We want it to be very clean, very fluffy. We try, you know, if there's any evidence that it's burned or the flour is darkening, whatever, we'll change it immediately. You know, we're aware of that. And then when so that's just, again, from my cultural upbringing, is you think about the end product, where it's going, is it nourishing your customers? All of that is part of our Indigenous philosophy, because we want to create that for, especially for our own people that still enjoy having that comfort food. But we want to be very cognizant of what we're putting into the dough and how we're cooking it and how it's, you know, I've been told many times they were convinced the frybread was baked because it was just not oily. And I take a lot of pride in that. But
yeah, that's good. That's right. So frybread is it a pretty popular bread in the traditional Indigenous cuisine?
It is, and we would probably call it more contemporary cuisine.
Okay.
So when it's particularly to Navajos, and every Indigenous community has a version of it. Okay. And has a story behind it. But Navajo, when we were forced on the long walk to Bosque Redondo, our rations were filled with flour, lard, salt. And that it became a necessity to develop a recipe where we could utilize our rations, and that's what frybread came out of. Oh. So in some circles, it could be seen as food of oppression. Okay. But if you flip that script, which is what I'm constantly doing, because there is another side to that, it also could be innovation and perseverance. And it depends on how you look at it. You know, they took something that, and they took what, you know, just these rations, and they made this beautiful bread. And I like to compare it to how the Chinese made ramen noodles, or the Japanese take credit for, or, you know, beignets in the South. All these beautiful breads that came from struggle, but are now part of our cultures. Yeah,
that's so. It's interesting you mentioned that in one of my previous interviews. I was talking to someone, and we started kind of going down that path, right? Is that the influence that, in this case, it was the West African influence that we see in our cuisine today across the country and across the world it's very real. Like, because like that, like you said, like that's the one thing that the slaves had to hold on to, is their cuisine, right? Everything else was stripped from them. But they had, and we talked about like little seeds that they were carrying and like things like that they would sneak into on, you know, through the whole passage. So yeah, I think it's interesting that, you know, we've got that commonality there. But it makes sense. It's very real. It's very real. So I mean, thank you for sharing that. So frybread is it sounds like, and I'll probably get this completely wrong, but it sounds like it's bread that you fry, right, in the clean oil. And I guess, how does it come out? Does it come out kind of crispy or soft on the inside? How does that happen?
So that will vary from recipe to recipe. And then there's also a bread called bannock, which is a little bit thicker.
Okay.
And the northern and Canadian tribes have bannock, and that has a particular story too. But our fry bread, our recipe comes out super light and fluffy, very, very fluffy.
Okay.
So it's kind of like eating a cloud, a big delicious cloud.
That sounds good.
There's a little bit of sweet in it, and you can put savory toppings or sweet toppings on it. Either way, it's just fabulous. Right now, our most popular dish is a chili verde on the fry bread.
Okay.
And our popular sweet dish is a honey lavender.
Wow.
We drizzle honey and real lavender buds that we get locally.
Yeah. And it sounds like it's pretty, I mean, you said it took you 20 years to really perfect it. So it's not an easy bread to make.
Before this, my fry bread came out sometimes crispy.
Right.
You couldn't reheat it.
Right.
It went cold. It was just, well, you should have ate it when it was hot.
There you go. Oh man. So along with the House of Frybread, you mentioned that you started a few other restaurants, right? And they've been sold off. And you kind of started going into some of the detail on those. What got you into those restaurants to start with, or into just starting restaurants, right? Like, I mean, and then having this passion and then continuing to do that after one, you sell it and then you go on to the next one. Like, what's your motivating factor to do that and then keep it going, like, and sustaining?
I love food. I've always loved food. And my brother was a self-taught chef before he got into a really great restaurant under a great chef, Chef Marcellino in Scottsdale. And throughout his career, we worked together to kind of evolve food we were familiar with, but wasn't getting recognition. And it was the lack of recognition that really pushed me to create beautiful spaces with beautiful recipes on beautiful plates in a gorgeous environment. I wanted to present our food because that's how I saw it. And this is how I see my culture. This is the beauty of it. And these are the talented members of the community that, people are just missing out on. But as I started to move more towards food advocacy, food sovereignty, food justice, I really started to understand that, when I started my first restaurant, I walked the streets and I asked people, what do you think? Sorry, it went dark. What do you think when I say Native American cuisine? And very often they didn't have an answer, or the answer was corned beans and fry bread. But we know that we've contributed 2/3 of the world's cuisine, or the world's agriculture. We have influenced every cuisine in the world. There's just no recognition for that. So I wanted to do that education piece. And the way I wanted to educate was just to show and have people ask me questions, and then I could answer the questions, and then we'd just learn. I never wanted to come from a place of, I always wanted to come from a place of humility. I didn't want to use anger or because I don't think people learn or are willing to learn. That very often they'll just shut down. So we wanted to be very careful about how we packaged our education, and we did a lot of it. We've done speaking events all over the country. We work with James Beard. We've worked with many great organizations. We've even gone back to our reservation and done boot camps for kids that may want to go into food, or wow. We need to build that foundation. And I've always said I want to open restaurants in my community, but the labor pool is just so lacking. So we wanted to, hopefully help create a love of cooking and serving, and then using local ingredients and try to help with relocalizing our food systems there. That's always been really important to me. And there's been a real resurgence in the last 10 years or so with people building gardens and farms, and, you know, working with people like Tyrone Thompson at Talani Lake Enterprises, Beaver Farms, Teapot Farms, and Chef Nephi Craig, who's on the San Carlos Nation, and his work with food as healing and recovery has been really amazing. So there's a lot of people out there doing this work. And if I can bring them, ever mention them in any conversation, I will do that, because we need more of us.
Yes, yes. What you're doing, and just from my research that I did, what you're doing seems extraordinary. I think that the restaurants are a great venue, but from what I saw, you're doing a lot outside of the restaurants, right? Like you are doing a
Maybe too
ton.
much.
Yes. Like, I mean, my real question is, how do you do it? but like, really, can we talk about some of that? Because like you mentioned, you kind of touched on the James Beard thing. Like when I saw that, I feel like everybody that knows something about culinary knows about James Beard and the James Beard Foundation or James Beard Awards or whatever. Um, that seems like a pretty big deal, and hopefully it was very successful for you, or has continues to be successful. I saw you're also doing a Protect Native Elders campaign that you've got. Um, can you kind of talk to me about some of that, like beyond the restaurant, like some more of your community involvement and how that's been going for you?
Sure. Um, so I followed James Beard most of my career, and the thing about them is, even at points where maybe they were perceived as being problematic, they always had an open door for conversation. And I really respect that about that organization, because when those topics were brought up, they didn't shy away from it. They went headlong into, well, how do we correct this? So that was one of the things that they realized was, in the last couple of years, many of their award winners were white male.
Yep.
And so that conversation started to come up, and they immediately addressed it and said, we hear you, you're correct, we want to fix this, because we love the food industry, and we recognize that many times the success of these restaurants are off the back of people of color. And so how do we honor that? And through that conversation, they began to understand that we have obstacles and less opportunity and less access to capital than many of our white male or white counterparts. It's just unfortunately how the system is set up currently. So what they wanted to do was to create a fund to support Black and Indigenous food, anybody in the food industry. And they were able to do it in such a quick manner. It was amazing to watch the process. So I was tapped as one of the committee members, and I was able to give my input, especially when I saw the application process. I read through the application process, and I said, this is going to discount probably 90 to 95% of Indigenous food businesses because of how our communities are structured. Some of us don't even have a business license structure. There's one bank on Navajo, Wells Fargo. Many food entrepreneurs don't have a bank account, much less an EIN. That they exist in this gray economy. But how do we discount them when we know that the work they're doing is very, very important? Trying to relocalize our food systems and create a healthier food for our community. And they listened and they restructured the application process so it would allow for that. And many times they say, if just show us receipts, show us a menu, pictures of your food, a letter of recommendation from the community. And so that I'm very blessed to be able to work with such an awesome organization, and an organization that listens.
Yeah. Wow. And what's can you talk about the Protect Native Elders? What is that?
Sure. So we had just opened a shared restaurant space in Window Rock on the Navajo Nation called Blackbird Brunch. We were responsible for Saturday and Sunday where we did brunch. We wanted to give that community an opportunity to have a beautiful space. And it was funny because it's just on this dirt lot next to a tire shop, and it's in this metal prefabricated building. But we redesigned the interior with the help of the owner, Robert Day Customs. He offered the space to us, and he did a lot of the work inside. And we just wanted to make it a beautiful place, like you were in the city or anywhere, but you're on the reservation. And we just wanted to create that beauty there and try to help people understand what you can achieve anywhere, no matter your circumstance. So we built Blackbird Brunch. We shared with up to 6 other chefs. They ran different nights, had a successful season, and then we're about to reopen. And we were about to reopen House of Frybread when COVID hit. So we signed the lease on House of Frybread in January 2020, which is the worst possible timing.
Oh.
So I had to, I understood, because I'm also the chair for Native Women Entrepreneurs of Arizona. And I'd been traveling all over San Carlos, Navajo, Hopi, Maricopa, Tana, talking to entrepreneurs to find out how we can support them to help them grow, what are the real obstacles in our communities. So I was aware, it's the lack of shipping, it's the lack of business infrastructure, it's lack of warehouses, and then water. 40% of the nation doesn't have running water, electricity. Oh, wow. So I'm listening to these news reports, and they're talking about you need to social distance, you need to wash your hands repeatedly, you need this and this. Very often we're the last people on the rung of any supply chain. And it was already starting, my husband's a tattoo artist, and he couldn't get gloves already. And so I'm thinking, we're not gonna have access to anything. How can I just went into okay, we're gonna I'm doing donation drives, drop everything off at House of Frybread. I quit building, I quit trying to move forward with the restaurant, and I just started taking donations. And people were really receptive. Running donations, it's about a 7-hour drive, and I was doing it once or twice a week. And in the middle of it, I came into contact with some other people that were hoping to help people on the Navajo Nation, and we ended up organizing Protect Native Elders. So Protect Native Elders raised about $5 million in cash and in-kind donations. We distributed PPE, water, sanitizer, water totes. We were able to impact 72 Indigenous communities from Mexico to Canada.
Wow.
And the amazing thing was, very often, especially on Navajo and in Hopi, we were one of the first people to contact with PPE, gloves, face shields, surgical gowns. And I'm talking about the police station, the hospitals. One of the things that we knew really quickly was the need for water. Water is a huge issue on most Indigenous communities, and especially Navajo, because of the natural resource extraction and how Peabody Coal Mine has slurried our water, pristine water, for the last 50 years. And then the droughts were in a mega drought, and the distance for especially elders to travel to access water has just grown and grown. It can be up to 100 miles now that they have to travel to access water. So we wanted to provide them with these 250, 275 gallon water totes. So make their, like, literally we would drop off a tote and an elder would tell us how he had been using 5-gallon Home Depot buckets to transport water. So that, you know, those, for any other community, it's just, that's about the size of your bathtub. If you're taking a bath, like, these people are just, you know, it was really heartbreaking, but our partners we worked with, Chrysler, and we worked with X-Wing, which is a really cool automated plane service, and all of these partnerships that came together to support us were just amazing. And so I did that for most of 2020 till, you know, people were starting to be able to get access to things, and there were bigger organizations starting to do a lot of the work we were doing, and the government was starting to get some funding, and, you know, we just considered ourselves a rapid response support.
Yeah. And
now we're working towards evolving into IndigiHub, which will be a long-term project where we want to provide support for entrepreneurs, because really what we need to do there is to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem. We need to start supporting micro entrepreneurs before we can support the medium to the large to the huge corporations. Otherwise, we won't retain any of that revenue in our communities. We'll just keep bleeding billions of dollars to the border towns, because we don't have basic services. So that's what we're pivoting towards now. Okay. And I always call it the house that Frybread built.
There you go. The house that Frybread built. Man, that's the work that you just described, even just then. That's a lot of people, and this is why I do these, right? Is so that we can get these stories out there, because this is right in our backyard, right? Where you have folks that you said need to go 100 miles just to get clean water. Like, that's insane. That is insane. So that work, it's critical. I mean, it's definitely needed. Like you said, it's rapid response, but you also can evolve into a long-term, more than just a Band-Aid, but now, you know, do the IndigiHub. And I think that's a good move. That's a really good move. So something else that, and I know I'm kind of going back and forth, but something else that you mentioned earlier that piqued my interest a little bit was, right, you said that when you ask somebody, you know, when you think of Native American food, what do you think of? And they say corn and, you know, these other things and fry bread. But like you said, like, there's an influence on in every culture from some type of Native, like, and I was thinking through it, I'm like, even like cornbread, like today, like in soul food, like we eat cornbread a lot, like, and that's because growing up, or not growing up, but, you know, back in slavery times, that's the slaves and the Native American folks were in the same boat, per se. But that makes so much sense. What are a couple other things that you've seen in the not Native American cuisine that you see that influence still?
You mean like other cuisines?
Yeah. Other cuisines where you can tell, like, oh, that's a Native American, and like that.
Right now, so on our menu, we have a soup. It's a corn soup we call pozole, which is very similar to pozole in Mexican culture. Yeah. And we're always arguing because people are like, you spelled it wrong. And I was like, well, This is a dish that originated with the Pueblo people, and we're neighbors with the Pueblo people, and we've traded for millennium and throughout the Southwest, and that's another thing I get is your menu looks very Mexican. It's like, well, we're from the Southwest, and we've influenced each other's cuisines forever, and we love green chili. Navajos love green chili. It's like a staple. Every meal has a piece of green chili. So there's definitely I mean, that's the evolution of cuisine, right? That's what cuisine is, the evolution of food. And we pick and borrow, and I try not to get stagnant in those arguments of, well, this isn't traditional, because I got a lot of that too.
Yeah.
Well, or this isn't Navajo food. Well, I'm a Navajo and I'm making it, so
So there you go.
I beg to differ.
That's the argument. That's the only argument you need.
Yeah.
Oh man. Okay, good. Well, I think that's a great explanation. And I've got just a couple more questions. I know we've been talking for a while, but I love this conversation. Um, what childhood memories do you have of either that center around cuisine in general, or even bread or fry bread even? Do you have any like memories that pop out to you when you think of the specific types of foods or breads or anything like that?
I know that, when some of my greatest joys were cooking for friends, even when I was in grade school, and I would make them fry bread or a Navajo taco.
Yeah.
And I just remember the joy of being able to share that part of my culture through food. And I think that's the foundation of why I wanted to open restaurants, because restaurants have the ability to bring community together, and they have a very familial, it's a very familial experience. And after all, we're all related. We're all family. So I think that was the foundation of why I love being in restaurants.
Yeah. That's awesome. That is awesome. So again, thank you so much, Blue, for your time. I know that you're busy. I know that you got a lot going on. Before we wrap up, do you have any, or I guess, what is one piece of advice you would give to somebody who's either early on in their culinary or restaurant journey, or who's thinking about getting into it, or anything like that?
Make sure you love it. You have to love it.
Yes.
You have to love it.
Yes.
And remember, like, I think not just for culinary in particular, but any business, there's an aspect of social capital you have to have, because you're going to build community, and that community is what's going to support you. So make sure you're telling your story, and you're thinking about your community, and hopefully you're leaving it a better place.
Yeah. It's good words to end on. I definitely appreciate it, Blue. I definitely appreciate it. Thank you again for your time.
Yeah, that's my pleasure.
Yes, yeah, it's been great. Everybody listening and watching, thank you all for listening and watching. Look up Blue. If you're ever in Provo, Utah, definitely go to House of Frybread. You can follow Blue's restaurant, and I'll put the Instagram handle. But otherwise, thank you guys for watching and for listening, and we will talk to everybody later. Bye, everybody.